the Vision Pro virtual reality headset, and I don't know, a handful of people, not a handful, but certainly it didn't take off in many ways. Do people actually want this?
I'm kind of cheered by the failure of the VR helmet. I mean, I'm glad that it didn't become a massive mainstream thing and we're not all wearing them right now. I think on some level people crave that, feeling of being surrounded by technology and digital images. But it's not all the time. And I think right now we're in a moment where tech companies are racing ahead of consumer desires. Like generative AI has very few use cases in a normal person's life. This AI companion is not something that the public is clamoring for. Maybe we will launch it once it is mainstream and is available. But I think we're kind of being led down a slippery slope that I personally don't particularly enjoy.
You don't want to particularly be cut off from the rest of the world?
No, I would prefer to interact with real people, maybe through the medium of a screen or through a video game. But ultimately, the goal for me is how technology can connect you into the world rather than barricade you away from it.
Kyle, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me again.
Kyle Chayka is a staff writer at the New Yorker magazine and the author of Filter World, How Algorithms Flattened Culture. He was in Washington, D.C., and the title of the piece that he wrote about cozy tech is the fantasy of cozy. This is The Current on CBC Radio. My name is Matt Galloway. If you rummage around your home, maybe look around the kitchen right now, you see a lot of black plastic nearby, things like black plastic spatulas, takeout containers, toys. If you do, you might have felt alarmed about a study that came out this fall around the potential dangers of this material. Researchers studied 203 black plastic consumer products and found flame retardant chemicals in 85% of them. These are toxic chemicals that can cause serious health issues like cancer. Joe Schwartz is director of McGill University's Office of Science and Society, and we spoke earlier this week about this study. Here's our conversation. This study created, I wouldn't say panic, but certainly a lot of attention and people kind of wondering whether they should toss all this black plastic that might be around them. Tell us a bit more about what the researchers found in the study.
Well, certainly, as you mentioned, it did create some panic. But when we talk about toxicity, it's very important to refer to numbers. It isn't enough to say that something is toxic or not. And this is indeed an issue with black plastic. Now, black plastics are sort of fascinating. The industry likes black plastic for several reasons. One is that when you add carbon black, which is the pigment that we're talking about here, to plastic, it makes the plastic more heat resistant. It increases its strength and rigidity. And very importantly, it blocks ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet light is really poison to plastics. It causes them to break down. So there is a reason to use carbon black. But then there are aesthetic considerations also, because consumers tend to evaluate black items as being more luxurious. And producers also like that. Leakage from foods packaged in black containers is less visible. Now, the question that arises here is about things like sushi containers and black spatulas that you may have in your kitchen. And the study was carried out by a nonprofit organization called Toxin Free Future and published in a very reputable journal. The journal is Chemosphere, and they investigated a number of plastics, including toys and kitchen appliances that were made of black plastic, and found that there were residues of flame retardants. Now, these are all items that do not have flame retardants purposely added to them, because let's face it, there's no risk of the kitchen spatula that you're using spontaneously bursting into flame, even when you are turning over your pancake or your scrambled eggs. So there's no need for these. So how come this is happening? Because black plastic is notoriously difficult to recycle. In a recycling facility, the plastic items kind of scoot by on a conveyor belt, and the machine detects the recyclable ones, and this is done by infrared radiation. Depending on reflection, the instrument can determine what sort of plastic it is. But black plastic does not reflect infrared light, so it is not sorted. It goes straight through on the conveyor belt and ends up in a bin that goes into landfill. But because there's a big demand for black plastic and it's not available from recycling facilities, then producers look elsewhere. So you can either produce it from raw materials, or they can reach out to some of these Asian countries where electronic equipment is dismantled in order to get precious metals out of it. But then they are left with a lot of black plastic, which is found in our computers, our television sets, our cell phones. And some companies will buy this and melt it all down and reformulate it into appliances. And that's how the fire retardants, which of course in TVs and computers are necessary. You sure don't want your TV bursting into flame.
No.
But then they end up in this plastic, which is all mixed together and melted down and reassembled into the items that we're talking about.
So how much of that is leaching out? How much of that flame retardant is leaching out from the toys and the spatulas?
That's indeed the question to ask, because toxicology revolves around numbers. Paracelsus, the great sage of the Renaissance, told us only the dose makes the poison, and that is critical to understand. So researchers at the University of Birmingham investigated exactly what amount transfers, and they discovered that just by handling the black plastic, there is no transference. So children playing with toys, that is not an issue. However, when they immersed bits of black plastic in olive oil at 160 degrees for 15 minutes, they did find some of this transfer to the oil. Now, the fact is that this is not really a mimic of how one would use spatula in a fry pan. You know, it's not exposed to 160 degrees for 15 minutes. And of course, we don't eat all of the oil that we use for frying. But nevertheless, based on this study, scientists at Toxin Free Future estimated a daily intake of 34,700 nanograms of the most toxic flame retardant.
Is that a lot? It's a big number, but is that a lot?
Well, it sounds like a big number, and that's why we have to look at what is called the reference dose. That is the number that scientists have developed based on laboratory experiments, animal experiments, which is safe for our daily intake. And that turns out to be 7,000 nanograms per kilogram of body weight. So the researchers said, look, the average body weight is 60 kilograms. They multiplied 7,000 by 60, and they came out with 42,000 and said that the 34,700 that was detected is too close to that for comfort. But they made a mistake. They made a mathematical mistake in the paper. 7,000 times 60 is not 42,000, but 420,000. So the supposed exposure is not close to the reference dose. It is actually 1/10 of it. And this is what caused all of the panic.
So are you suggesting, the math could scramble people's heads, but are you suggesting that perhaps we don't need to panic, that these things are not leaching as much of the harmful chemical as we might want to believe?
Exactly. They were off by a factor of 10. So indeed, the amount that leaches out is not close to the reference level that tells us safety.
I don't think anybody would want any of the leaching to come out. We assume that, the spatula that you're using, sure, little bits and pieces of it fall off, but generally you don't want, to believe that is going to help poison you, or even a small
Well, yes,
dose.
this is true, but we are surrounded by potential toxins, in our life everywhere. The question is whether we are talking about, a flea on the back of an elephant, flicking that off, or talking something that is more significant. Well, in this case, because of this mathematical error, I think we're talking about a very small risk. But that being said, these flame retardants should never be in these items.
Why don't we just stop using black plastics? Is there something else that we could use instead of those black plastics that have unnecessary flame retardants in them?